Hey guys, it's Danny, and for today's 101 ingredient, we are covering mushrooms. Now here's the deal. There are literally thousands of different varieties of mushrooms. For the sake of this video, I'm just gonna be covering the most common mushrooms that I see at my grocery store. So I'll be covering creminis, chantrelles, shiitakes, white mushrooms, and portobellos. Now, mushrooms are a fungus and they have powerful medicinal qualities. They're antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory, plus they help to boost and support the immune system. Part of what gives mushrooms their potency is their ability to absorb and concentrate whatever it is they grow in. That's why it's pretty important when you can to try to find organic mushrooms. Now, there's two main categories when it comes to mushrooms. You either have cultivated mushrooms or wild mushrooms. Cultivated mushrooms are the day-to-day mushrooms that most of you are probably more familiar with. This would include white mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, and portobello mushrooms. Wild mushrooms, on the other hand, tend to be a little bit more exotic, and these would include mushrooms like shiitakes, porcinis, and chantrelle mushrooms. So to get started, I'm gonna take a look at some of the cultivated mushrooms. White mushrooms are probably the mushroom most available to us. They have a very mild, earthy flavor, and the caps can range anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3 inches round. You want them to have their stems attached, and as long as the stems aren't too dried out on the bottom, you can chop them up and include them in the dish as well. They have a ton of flavor. Sometimes you might see the little mushrooms labeled as button mushrooms, but they really are the same exact mushrooms. The little ones are just the babies, and then the bigger ones are a little bit older. The bigger ones are the ones that you'll see people really like to stuff and bake. Now, oftentimes you'll find them in bulk at the grocery store. If not, they come in 8-ounce or 16-ounce containers. And while they are available all year round, their peak season is the fall and the winter. Cremini mushrooms and portobello mushrooms are essentially the same mushroom. The cremini is just the baby version of the portobello. If you let this cremini continue to grow, the cap opens up and flattens out, and then the gills turn this dark chocolate brown color. This is why oftentimes you'll see cremini mushrooms labeled as baby bellas, because really they are just a baby portobello mushroom. The cremini mushrooms are sometimes called Italian brown mushrooms or Swiss brown mushrooms. They are very similar in shape and size to the white mushroom, except their color is a little bit darker. They tend to be more tan and brown, and their flavor is a little bit richer. It's a little bit deeper than a white mushroom. But ultimately, a cremini mushroom and a white mushroom are completely interchangeable in any recipe. If you're looking for a little more flavor, go with the cremini. If you want something a little bit more wild, stick with the white mushroom. Now, the big, beautiful portobello mushroom is much larger than a white or a cremini mushroom. The caps are flat and wide, and oftentimes they can measure up to 6 inches in diameter. Now, if you look underneath, you'll see that the gills are exposed, and what that means is that the mushrooms have begun to lose a little bit of their moisture. And when that evaporation takes place, what happens is the mushroom becomes very concentrated in flavor, and it also gets a very dense, meaty texture. And that is why so often you will see portobello mushrooms substituted for meat, right? They're insanely delicious made on the grill. They make for a great vegetarian burger. And oftentimes, if people are looking for a vegetarian option, they'll make a portobello steak. Even meat lovers would agree that the portobello mushroom is insanely delish. However, their stems do tend to be a little bit tough and woody, so more often than not, you're gonna wanna remove those. But don't throw them away, because they do wonders in a soup or in a stock. Now, whenever you're shopping for any of these cultivated mushrooms, you wanna look for mushrooms that have a nice even color, no soft spots, no discoloration, and you don't want them to be slimy. Now, obviously the portobello mushrooms, you're gonna see the gills underneath, but as for these little guys, you wanna make sure that the caps are on nice and tight, so the gills should not be exposed. Once you get them home, you can store them in a paper bag or in a plastic bag that you've poked a few holes in just to let them breathe a little bit. Pop them right in your veggie drawer, and they will last you a good 5 days if you store them properly. Now let's chat about wild mushrooms. Honestly, guys, there are so many different varieties of wild mushrooms out there. So if that is something you guys want me to dive into a little bit deeper, come on down into the comments below and let me know, because I can certainly do that. But for today, I am just covering two different types of wild mushrooms. I am covering shiitake mushrooms and chanterelle mushrooms. And honestly, I chose these two because they were both available at my grocery store. Now, the shiitake mushroom is one of my personal favorites when it comes to the wild mushroom. They do tend to be a little bit more pricey, but so do all the wild mushrooms. And they have this really kind of fun, funky look. They have a longer stem, and then the caps look a little bit like an umbrella. They have a tan brownish color to them, and the texture is very meaty. And the thing about the shiitake is that it has a very distinctive smoky flavor to it. Unlike the cultivated mushrooms, the shiitake mushrooms are best when they are cooked, but the stems are definitely too tough to eat, so you want to remove the stems before working with the mushroom. Now, oftentimes they can be hard to find fresh, but you usually will be able to find them dried. If that's the case, all you need to do to reconstitute your mushroom is to pour some hot water over the mushrooms, let them sit for 15 to 20 minutes, drain them out, and they're ready to go. Just make sure that you reserve the liquid that you soak them in, because it is going to be full of mushroom goodness, and if you're making a soup or any type of mushroom dish, you can add it right in along and you get another layer of flavor. And a good tip to remember, guys, is when you're working with dried mushrooms, 3 ounces of dried mushrooms is equivalent to 1 pound of fresh mushrooms. Spring and autumn are when the shiitake is most readily available, and when you're shopping for them, what you want to look for are nice plump mushrooms, and the edges should be curled under. Avoid anything that is broken or if the caps look all shriveled up. This very versatile mushroom likes to be baked, sauteed, and broiled. And take note, because oftentimes when you're at the store, they can be called Chinese black mushrooms and or forest mushrooms. The last mushroom I'm going to be covering today is another wild mushroom, and it is called the chantrelle. Now, chanterelle mushrooms tend to be a little bit more orange, sometimes gold, and they have a really thick, rich, meaty texture to them, and the tops are ruffled. Now, they don't really have gills underneath, but they do push up and outward. So many people say they look a little bit like a tulip. This particular one doesn't really look like a tulip to me, but oftentimes they do. Now again, the texture is really dense and meaty, and the flavor is nutty and fruity. A lot of people say that the aroma of a chanterelle is like an apricot or a peach. Now, the entire mushroom is edible, but the stem tends to be a little bit chewier than the tops. And because they are so beautiful and distinct, just a simple saute with some onion and garlic is a great place to start with these. Just remember that when you cook with these, because they do come in different shapes and sizes, that you want to cut them into fairly uniform pieces so that when they're cooking, they all cook at the same rate. But all in all, definitely a mushroom worth trying because it is distinct and delicious. Once you get your mushrooms home, you are going to do the same thing to your wild mushrooms that we do with our cultivated mushrooms. And then when you're ready to work with them, you want to wipe them down with a wet paper towel. Remember, the mushrooms are super absorbent. So ideally, you don't want to run them underwater. But if they're really dirty and you absolutely have to, make sure that you use cold water, work quickly, and then dry them off in a clean towel. Some of the flavors that mushrooms love to be paired with include almonds, butter, chives, garlic, onions, sherry, rosemary, fish, potatoes, and that's just to name a few. But now I want to hear from you. Do you like mushrooms? Have you ever tried any of the mushrooms I talked about today? And or do you have a favorite mushroom? If so, come on down into the comments below and let me know. And for those of you who cannot wait to get started working with your mushrooms, make sure to go down to the description box below because I am going to link to a handful of clean and delicious mushroom recipes. And also make sure that you get your bum bums back here on Thursday because I am going to be sharing a creamy mushroom soup recipe that's going to blow your mind. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm Danny Spees, and I will see you next time with some more clean and deliciousness.
Okay. What'd you call it as a kid?
Tushy, or what's the word that, tushy or coolie?
You called it a coolie? Not a keister?
No, coulis was a big one in my mom's family.
Coolie?
Get your coulis over here.
That's funny.
Tushy and coulis. What'd you call it?
But.
But.